They said Rome was built on virtue, but beneath its marble temples and golden forums, its true foundation was desire. Welcome, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight, we descend beneath the streets of the eternal city, to where history's clean pages were written with sweat, whispers, and sin. This is the hidden Rome, one the poets praised in metaphor, and the senators pretended not to know. The empire may have conquered the world, but in the shadows beneath its palaces, the world conquered Rome. This is the secret brothels of ancient Rome. It begins, as all things Roman did, with ambition. The year was 47 BCE. Julius Caesar had returned from Egypt, richer, bolder, and more restless than ever. The Senate called him dictator, the people called him divine, yet in the feverish pulse of the city, one rumor murmured louder than all his speeches. A new house had opened beneath the Forum Romanum, a place where senators, soldiers, and slaves shed their identities with their clothes. They called it Domus Amoris, the house of love, but love was only the mask. Hidden behind its silk curtains was a network that would outlive Caesars, topple families, and turn Rome's greatest vice into its most profitable industry. The entrance was nothing. A wooden door behind a wine shop painted red, marked only by a carved dove. Inside, the air was heavy with incense and laughter. A staircase wound down into torchlit corridors lined with mosaics that shimmered with erotic myth. Venus rising from the sea, Mars and Rhea Silvia entwined in flame, and Priapus, god of virility, smiling in eternal mockery. At the end of the hall stood Livia Corda, a woman of impossible calm. Once a courtesan in the house of Pompey, she had survived the civil wars by learning the one art Rome prized above politics: silence. Her brothel was not merely a place of pleasure, it was a marketplace of secrets. Senators came for lust and left indebted. Generals came for rest and left betrayed. She kept records, names, confessions, promises. Each night, she wrote them in wax tablets hidden inside the walls. Over time, her notes became an empire of their own, the Codex Obscura.
The House of Love was a mirror of Rome itself, opulent, ruthless, devout in its hypocrisy. Men who voted for morality by day begged for mercy in its chambers by night. And Livia watched them all, learning that information was the truest aphrodisiac. To outsiders, the brothel's decor was mythological indulgence: statues of Venus, beds draped in crimson silk, bronze mirrors reflecting dim torchlight. But to those initiated, every detail was coded. A peacock feather signaled discretion. A cup of honeyed wine meant payment in favor, not coin. A candle extinguished at the wrong time could mean death. Rome's underworld had no boundaries between pleasure and politics. One night, a visitor came unannounced. A tall man in a dark cloak, face hidden by the hood. The guards recognized him by his signet ring, an eagle clutching thunderbolts. It was Marcus Antonius, the general of Caesar himself. He descended the stairs silently and met Livia in her private chamber, where a single lamp burned low. He did not come for flesh. He came for a message. Caesar wants loyalty, he said, and loyalty begins where shame lives. He offered her protection, patronage, and silence. In exchange, her brothel would serve as the empire's ear. Every secret whispered in lust would belong to Caesar. Livia smiled faintly. "And when Caesar falls," she asked. Antonius returned her smile. "Then you will already know who replaces him." That night, the House of Love became something new, the first intelligence bureau of Rome. By dawn, slaves carried coded messages, disguised as perfume jars, traveling between bathhouses, taverns, and temples. Courtesans memorized names and gossip, reciting them like poetry. Livia's network grew faster than Caesar's legions. The Senate debated morality. She defined it. But the gods of Rome, ever watchful, demanded balance. Pleasure invited ruin, and power always asked for blood. It began with jealousy.
A nobleman named Gaius Lucullus, famed for his banquets and arrogance, had fallen in love with one of Livia's courtesans, a woman called Aurelia, whose eyes were said to mirror the Tiber at night. When she refused his gift of marriage, Lucullus stormed through the brothel, drunk and furious, shouting her name. Livia appeared from the shadows, unarmed, composed. "You forget where you are," she said. "This is my city," he spat. "You sell Rome's dignity." She stepped closer. "No, Gaius, I sell its reflection." Moments later, he was gone, found the next morning in his garden, lips stained with honey and hemlock. The Senate called it suicide. The whispers said otherwise. The House of Love became legend. To some, it was sin incarnate. To others, salvation. Poets disguised its name in verses, and even priests of Venus attended in secret, claiming to perform rituals of fertility. Beneath the empire's marble perfection beat a heart of desire, and in that pulse, Rome found both its ecstasy and its undoing. As decades passed, new rulers rose and fell, but Domus Amoris endured, sometimes hidden, sometimes renamed, always alive. The brothel's red walls outlasted temples and emperors, and deep below, in chambers untouched by time, the wax tablets of Livia Cordis waited, an archive of lust and loyalty that could destroy dynasties. Because every empire begins in glory, but it always ends in confusion. They said Rome had 7 hills, but few knew it had 7 doors, each leading not to glory, but to temptation. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight we walk through those 7 hidden doors, beneath the marble palaces, beyond the temples, into the perfumed labyrinth where the empire's most sacred sins were sold as art.
The Domus Amoris had become legend. What began as one hidden house beneath the Forum now stretched its shadow across all of Rome. From the Aventine to the Palatine, from the Subura's alleys to the gardens of the Esquiline, 7 great brothels rose like secret altars, each ruled by its own mistress, each dedicated to a different god, each whispering to the same power. Together, they were known as the 7 Doors of Desire, and their names were forbidden to speak aloud. The first door stood near the Circus Maximus, Domus Veneris, the House of Venus. Its walls glowed with lamps shaped like doves, its air thick with myrrh and jasmine. Here senators came not to conquer, but to surrender. Courtesans were trained to flatter, confess, and remember. Every pillow carried a secret, every kiss a confession. The goddess of love, they said, smiled here more than in her own temple. The second door, hidden near the gladiators' barracks, was Domus Martis, the House of Mars. This was no place for softness. Its patrons were soldiers, men who worshipped violence as prayer. The women here wore red ribbons around their wrists and greeted their lovers with wine mixed with ash. It was rumored that each had killed a man, and that the sound of laughter here always ended in a scream. The third door stood in the heart of the Subura, Rome's poorest and wildest quarter, Domus Mercurii, the House of Mercury. This was the brothel of thieves, merchants, and spies. Behind its velvet curtains, deals were made that changed the empire. A single night's pleasure could bankrupt a province. Its mistress, Flavia Secunda, was known as the Golden Tongue because she never forgot what she heard. The fourth door belonged to Domus Bacchi, the House of Bacchus, near the Aventine Hill. There the nights never ended. Wine flowed like blood, music never ceased, and the line between joy and madness dissolved. Patrons entered laughing and left broken, having glimpsed something too divine or too depraved to name. The walls here were painted with scenes of Dionysian frenzy, figures dancing with serpents, eyes rolled heavenward, mouths open in silent hymns.
The fifth door opened on the Esquiline, surrounded by gardens and tombs, Domus Somni, the House of Sleep. It was said that those who entered did not wake until they had dreamed their deepest sins. Its courtesans were pale and silent, dressed in blue silk, their movements slow as drifting smoke. They served potions distilled from poppy and honey, and their lovers often claimed to see visions, lost wives, unborn children, faces from forgotten wars. The sixth door was the rarest and most dangerous, Domus Fortunae, the House of Fortune. Its rooms were filled with mirrors, dice, and cards of ivory. The courtesans were dressed as goddesses of fate, their laughter as sharp as knives. Men came to gamble their money, their dignity, and sometimes their lives. The mistress of the house was Livia Corda's own daughter, Cassia Fortuna, a woman said to possess her mother's beauty and none of her mercy. And the seventh door, hidden deepest beneath the Palatine Hill itself, was simply called Domus Umbrae, the House of Shadows. No one knew who ran it. Some said no human did. It was said that the door could only be found by those invited, and that its rooms contained no lamps. The only light came from oil bowls burning black. The air smelled of iron and incense, and the sounds inside were not always human. Patrons spoke of masked figures who touched without flesh, of whispers that knew their childhood names. None who entered left unchanged. These 7 doors formed the true map of Rome's heart. Each night, carriages moved between them, carrying senators, poets, generals, even priests. Each house offered a different kind of devotion, but every path led back to the same altar, the empire's hunger for control disguised as desire. And at the center of this network, unseen but omnipresent, sat Livia Corda, now old, her hair silver as the moonlight that never touched her face. Though she rarely left her chambers, her influence flowed through the city like blood through veins. Every mistress owed her loyalty. Every rumor passed through her ears. She was Rome's invisible empress.
Yet power, like pleasure, demands renewal. One evening, during the festival of Saturnalia, a messenger came to Livia bearing a sealed wax tablet. It bore the crest of Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. His message was brief. The old Rome dies in shadows. I need those who know how to move within them. Octavian understood what no emperor before him had dared, that the brothels were not dens of sin, but arteries of influence. He summoned Livia's network into his service. In return for immunity, the 7 doors became his unseen eyes. From that day on, No rebellion, no assassination, no whisper escaped the emperor's reach. The courtesans became Rome's informants, their kisses carrying messages, their laughter concealing lies. Pleasure had become statecraft. But the gods, jealous of human cunning, began to twist their gift. The brothel's wealth bred rivalry. Poison replaced perfume. Secrets turned into weapons. And one by one, the 7 doors began to devour each other. The house of Venus was raided for treason. The house of Mars burned in a riot. The house of Mercury vanished overnight, its mistress's tongue nailed to the door. Only 3 houses survived: the house of sleep, the house of fortune, and the nameless house of shadows. Rome's pleasures had become nightmares. By the time Augustus, once Octavian, declared himself divine, the city had learned a cruel lesson. Desire may build empires, but it always buries them in silence. And beneath the marble palaces, the 7th door still waited, locked, breathing softly, as though it knew the empire's days were numbered.
They said all roads led to Rome, but the most dangerous road was the one that went beneath it. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight we open the last of the 7 doors, the one even Rome itself pretended not to know. This is Domus Umbrae, the House of Shadows, a brothel that was not built for pleasure, but for communion. A place where desire met death, and where every sigh was a prayer to something older than the gods. It was said that the entrance lay beneath the Palatine Hill, hidden behind a false wall in the ruins of an ancient temple to Cybele. No signs marked it, no slaves guided visitors there. Only those invited by name ever found the door. To others, the passage appeared as nothing but darkness, a black archway in which torchlight disappeared as if swallowed. The House of Shadows was a world without day. Its corridors were carved from volcanic stone, veined with silver that glimmered faintly in the torch smoke. The air smelled of iron, salt, and incense. Every step echoed like a heartbeat, and at its center there was no music, no laughter, only silence deep enough to hear your own pulse. The guests who entered were the highest of Rome's hierarchy: senators, generals, philosophers, and priests, men who had known every indulgence but sought something deeper, the thrill of surrender not to flesh but to oblivion. They called it communio umbrarum, the communion of shadows. Here, courtesans did not speak. They wore masks of gold and veils of obsidian beads. They moved like smoke, touching without touching. Their presence was both invitation and warning, and those who came to them found themselves reflected, not in mirrors, but in living eyes that knew their secrets before they were spoken. The mistress of the house was known only as Valaria Nox, Valeria of the Night. No one remembered her origin, but legend said she was born from a family of augurs, trained in sacred rites before she vanished into exile. Her voice, they said, could calm storms or summon them. She believed pleasure was a language through which souls confessed their true nature.
Her ritual was simple: a basin of black water, a drop of wine, and a question whispered in Latin: Quid amas? What do you love? The answer was never spoken aloud, but by dawn she always knew. Rome's elite came to her seeking ecstasy, but left haunted.
They saw visions, lovers long dead, faces they had wronged, empires burning in silence. Some swore the air itself whispered. Others claimed to feel the touch of those they had buried. Yet all returned, unable to resist the house's pull. For beneath the sensual facade, Domus Umbrae was an experiment. Valeria Knox sought to prove what philosophers only dared theorize, that the soul could be reached through the body, that mortality could be transcended by intimacy so absolute it erased identity. Her courtesans were not women, not slaves, not mistresses. They were vessels, each trained in the art of hypnosis, herbal intoxication, and sacred breathwork once practiced by the priests of Isis. To lie with them was to be unmade. One night, during the height of Augustus's reign, the emperor himself sent an emissary bearing a message. Rome was plagued not by disease, but by restlessness. Citizens grew weary of conquest, hungry for meaning. Augustus sought a new faith, something that could bind hearts as laws bound bodies. He wanted Valeria's rights for the empire. She refused. Rome, she said, was built by men who fear their own reflection. My house exists to show them what they are. The next morning, her emissary was found dead, his lips black, his eyes wide, his hands clutching a golden mask. The House of Shadows was sealed by imperial decree.
But Valeria's followers, her children of the night, simply went deeper. They moved their rituals into catacombs beneath the Aventine, merging with the mystery cults of Mithras and Cybele. Their practices spread in whispers: sacred intoxication, blindfolded communion, silent prophecy. Those who joined claimed to feel the pulse of the gods within themselves. Those who betrayed them vanished. The Roman historian Tacitus later wrote that a sect of women who worshipped darkness as a husband had infiltrated the noble families. He dismissed it as superstition, but in the private letters of senators, one phrase appears again and again: they have seen the mirror. What was this mirror? Some said it was a pool of obsidian, polished so smooth it reflected souls instead of faces. Others said it was no object at all, but a state of mind reached through pleasure and terror combined. Those who gazed upon it were said to understand their own death and to lose the ability to fear it. That was the secret power of Domus Umbrae. In its chambers, men of war wept like children, wives forgave their betrayers, thieves confessed to gods they no longer believed in, and through their surrender, the house collected something rarer than gold: truth. Valeria's last recorded words, written on a scrap of wax tablet found centuries later, read, "The empire ends where the shadow begins. What we built beneath will outlive marble." When Nero's fires consumed half of Rome, the House of Shadows was said to have burned too. But witnesses claimed to see masked figures walking unharmed through the smoke, carrying silver bowls that glowed in the dark. No bodies were ever found. And deep below, where the ruins turned to ash and the ash turned to silence, a single room remained intact, a basin of black stone, still filled with water that never dried. Those who found it centuries later swore that if you leaned close enough, you could hear a woman whisper, "What do you love?" The question that Rome never stopped asking.
They said Nero ruled Rome like a god, but gods in Rome were only men who had learned how to lie beautifully. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight, we walk through marble gates gilded with madness, into a world where desire became divine and pleasure became policy. This is the Emperor's Garden, the paradise that devoured an empire. When the House of Shadows vanished beneath Nero's flames, its spirit did not die. It merely changed shape. The darkness that once hid beneath the Palatine Hill now bloomed openly in sunlight, because Nero believed that what was done in shadow could be sanctified by art. He called it Domus Aurea, the Golden House, but the people called it something else, the Garden of Gods and Ghosts. It sprawled across the ruins left by the Great Fire of 64 CE, an estate so vast that it swallowed a quarter of the city. Its halls glowed with gold leaf and jewels, its ceilings painted with constellations that moved as the emperor dined. There were fountains that poured wine instead of water, and gardens filled with perfumed steam rising from marble baths. But beneath the music and marble was the true purpose of the palace: indulgence elevated to ritual. Nero believed pleasure was proof of divinity. He said, "The gods created desire to remind us we are theirs." He saw himself as their chosen vessel, a man meant to taste everything forbidden and make it beautiful. And so he filled the Golden House with what the city had lost: the courtesans, performers, and priestesses who once served in Livia Corda's brothels. He renamed them Nymphae Imperiales, imperial nymphs, and gave them rooms adorned with mirrors and painted skies. Their duty was not to serve, but to inspire.
Every night, Nero staged a performance. He sat upon a golden throne at the center of the garden, surrounded by fountains and torches. The air shimmered with music from hidden lyres, and the scent of roses drifted from the baths. His guests, senators, poets, foreign kings, watched as the nymphs danced through water and smoke, their bodies painted with symbols of gods and planets. The performances were called Spectacula Amoris, spectacles of love. Each represented a myth: Venus and Mars, Orpheus and Eurydice, Zeus and Europa. But these were no simple plays. The actors lived the myth, and sometimes they died for it. One night, Nero commanded that the myth of Persephone be reenacted, the goddess of spring taken into the underworld. The chosen performer was Claudia Prisca, a courtesan said to have descended from Valeria Nox herself. She performed her role flawlessly, until the end. As the torches dimmed and the scene darkened, the stage opened beneath her feet. The crowd gasped, believing it part of the show. But when the floor closed again, she was gone. No scream, no trace, only the echo of her last line: "The shadow is not the end, but the beginning." The next morning, Nero declared the performance divine. He said, "The gods have accepted her." But whispers spread that Claudia had been sacrificed. To what? No one dared ask. After that night, the garden changed. The laughter grew quieter. The air grew heavier. Musicians began to play songs that no one remembered teaching them. Guests reported hearing voices in the fountains, laughter in empty halls. Courtesans refused to perform, claiming they saw shadows moving beneath the water. Nero dismissed them, saying, "Even ghosts come to worship." But those who served him began to fear the garden itself. In the heart of the palace stood the Hall of Mirrors, a circular chamber lined with polished obsidian. Nero would retreat there alone for hours, staring at his reflection while incense burned. He claimed he was speaking with his other self, his divine twin who guided his actions. Some said the mirror was no ornament. It was the very same object once kept in the House of Shadows, the mirror of souls brought to the surface when the city burned. It was said that when Nero looked into it, he saw not his own face, but the faces of those he would kill. The mirror told him who loved him falsely,
It whispered the names of traitors before they spoke, and every name it gave, he erased. Historians would later call Nero mad, but perhaps he was merely infected by the same knowledge that had haunted Rome's hidden houses for generations. Pleasure was no longer indulgence, it was communion. As his paranoia grew, so did his obsession with control. He began to record his guests' conversations through hidden passages, sending his nymphs to seduce secrets from them. The Golden House became both palace and prison, a new brothel of empire, where every touch carried a price. One senator wrote in a secret letter, "We dine in a temple of gold, but the walls breathe, and the eyes of statues follow us." In the summer of 68 CE, the gods finally turned their faces away. Rome rebelled. Nero fled through the same tunnels that once carried messages from the House of Love. When soldiers found him, he whispered his final words before the blade struck. "What an artist dies in me." But Rome did not bury him alone. The Golden House burned. The garden wilted. And yet beneath the ash, one chamber remained untouched, the Hall of Mirrors. When archaeologists uncovered it centuries later, they found something extraordinary. The walls still shone, the obsidian unbroken. And though the torches had been extinguished for 1,000 years, the glass was warm to the touch. One scholar wrote, trembling, "I looked into the mirror and saw not my reflection, but a face wearing a laurel crown, smiling through tears." The emperor's garden, they said, had never truly died. It had merely changed its flowers. They said the fire of Nero purified Rome, but ashes, when left too long, begin to breed. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight, we walk among ruins that smell of myrrh instead of smoke, where marble hides rot and memory hides desire. This is the tomb of perfume, the place where the empire buried its sins, but forgot to seal the coffin. When Nero's Golden House fell, Rome tried to cleanse itself. The Senate outlawed excess. Temples to chastity were raised where brothels once stood. Statues of Venus were draped, paintings whitewashed. The empire, wounded by shame, sought virtue like a beggar seeks bread. But shadows are patient. They do not die, they wait. And so, beneath the ruins of the Palatine and the charred gardens of the Esquiline, the survivors of Rome's pleasure cults gathered once more. Courtesans, servants, and forgotten mistresses, all women who had seen the empire's hidden face and lived to remember it. Among them was a name whispered like a curse, Cassia Fortuna, daughter of Livia Corda, the matron who had once ruled the 7 doors of desire. She had escaped Nero's fall by disguising herself as a priestess of Vesta, the virgin goddess. For years she walked unrecognized through the temples, her face veiled, her heart burning. But when night came, she went below. In the ruins of the Golden House, Cassia gathered her disciples. There, among the cracked mosaics and dust of fallen empires, she rebuilt what the world tried to forget. A sanctuary, not of pleasure, but remembrance. They called it Sepulchrum Unguentum, the tomb of perfume. By day, it appeared as a humble perfumery, run by widows who sold oils and incense to the devout. By night, the doors closed and the candles burned black. The air filled with the scent of crushed roses, amber, and myrrh. Beneath the shop, through a trapdoor hidden by amphorae, a spiral staircase descended into a chamber lined with ancient marble heads and urns.
Each urn contained a secret, ashes mixed with resin and oil,
said to hold the essence of those who had once ruled Rome's pleasure houses. Cassia taught her followers the art of distillation, not of fragrance, but of memory. They believed scent could preserve the soul. Smell, she told them, is the oldest language. Before man spoke, he breathed. In this chamber of perfumes, they performed rites older than Rome. Oils were poured onto altars, while hymns were whispered in languages that no scholar could identify. It was said that when the ritual reached its height, the air shimmered and the walls exhaled. Visitors came secretly: senators, poets, widows, and philosophers. They paid not for flesh, but for visions. A single vial of the tomb's perfume was said to conjure forgotten lovers in dreams, to let the dead speak through scent. Some swore it healed heartbreak. Others claimed it brought madness. One formula in particular became infamous: unguentum umbrae, the shadow oil. It was distilled from crushed lilies, poppy resin, and a drop of human blood. Those who inhaled it claimed to see faces in the smoke, to hear whispers calling them by name. It was said that Cassia herself used it to speak with her mother's spirit. A Roman chronicler named Gaius Petronius, yes, the same who once wrote Satyricon, recorded in secret his visit to the tomb. His words survive only in fragments, scorched at the edges. The air was sweet and sickening. I heard laughter, but it came from no throat. I felt a kiss from something that was not flesh. Cassia stood before me and said, "Every empire leaves a scent. Ours smells like forgiveness." Over time, rumors grew. Citizens whispered that the perfumery's clients never aged, that those who worked there never left its walls. Some claimed the smoke drifting from its vents carried hallucinations across the city. At night, patrols reported faint music rising from the ruins, mingled with sighs that were not entirely human. And yet, the tomb endured for decades, untouched by fire or famine. Then came Vespasian, the new emperor, a soldier, a skeptic, a man who saw ghosts as tricks of the weak. When reports reached him of women performing fragrant sorcery beneath the Palatine, he sent his praetorians to destroy the place.
They entered with torches. They never returned. The next morning, the alley was silent. The perfumery stood unharmed, its door still sealed with wax. Inside, every amphora was shattered. The oils had soaked into the floor, filling the air with unbearable sweetness. Of Cassia Fortuna and her followers, no trace remained, except a single inscription carved into the marble beneath the altar. We do not vanish, we dissolve. For centuries, no one dared enter the ruins again. Yet archaeologists in later ages found traces of resin in the stones, perfume residue that still released scent when heated. The fragrance was unlike any known oil, floral, smoky, and faintly human. Even now, in modern Rome, construction workers restoring basements near the Palatine sometimes report a strange phenomenon. The air thickens suddenly with the scent of myrrh and lilies, though no flowers are near. One worker fainted after inhaling it, and awoke murmuring in Latin words he never learned. Domus sub odor, the house beneath the scent. Some say it was only imagination. Others say the tomb of perfume still breathes beneath the city, keeping alive the empire's oldest memory, the union of desire and death. Because Rome was not merely a city of marble and conquest. It was a body, and every body remembers its perfume long after it decays. They said Rome would fall when the Vestal flame died, but no one asked what that flame was truly burning. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight we enter the holiest sanctum of the empire, the Temple of Vesta, home to the Vestal virgins, women sworn to purity, yet surrounded by fire. This is the Virgins of the Flame, the story of those who guarded Rome's soul while hiding the city's oldest secret sin. In the heart of the forum stood the Aedes Vestae, a round temple of white marble and gold, its sacred fire burning day and night. To the people, it symbolized Rome's eternal life. To the Senate, it was divine insurance. And to the Vestals, 6 chosen women, it was both duty and cage. The Vestals were bound by a vow older than the Republic itself, 30 years of chastity in exchange for power no other woman could possess. They could own property, free slaves, even pardon the condemned with a touch. Their word could stop an execution. Their presence sanctified oaths. They were Rome's living idols.
But beneath their serenity, something darker glowed. The fire they tended was not mere symbol. It was said to feed on breath. When one Vestal died, another was chosen, always young, always beautiful, always afraid. And every girl who took the vow did so beneath the gaze of the Pontifex Maximus, who promised her eternity in exchange for silence. That silence, over time, became unbearable. Among the Vestals during Emperor Vespasian's reign was Servilia Primigenia, a woman unlike the others. She was older than most, chosen late after losing her husband in the civil wars. Her face was serene, her voice soft, her devotion perfect. Yet the other virgins whispered that when she prayed before the flame, the fire dimmed, as though it bowed to her. Servilia had secrets. Late at night, when the others slept, she would descend into the crypt below the temple. There, the ashes of centuries were stored, each urn containing remnants of past flames mixed with incense and blood. It was here she discovered a hidden door, sealed with iron. Behind it, she found what no Vestal should ever see, a small chamber lined with walls of black glass, and in its center, an altar carved from onyx. Upon it lay a single object, a silver bowl filled with dried rose petals, hardened like stone. The scent still lingered, myrrh, poppy, and something human. She had found the last remnant of the tomb of perfume. From that night onward, the fire of Vesta changed. It burned higher, brighter, whispering in the quiet hours. Servilia began to mix the ashes from the bowl into the sacred flame, claiming it made the fire purer. The others believed her. Rome believed her. And for a time, the city prospered. But the gods demand balance. Soon, strange things began to happen. Birds fell silent over the forum. Wine soured overnight. The scent of roses haunted the temple even when none were near. When one of the younger Vestals touched the flame, she screamed, and her hands blistered, though no heat was felt.
Servilia said it was divine punishment, but in truth, she knew the fire was no longer fed by oil alone. She had reawakened the breath of the old cult, the perfume of Cassia Fortuna, the essence of desire long buried. The sacred fire became alive, whispering in tongues only she could understand. Each night, Servilia listened, and the flame spoke. We never died. We changed our shape. It called her
daughter of smoke. It told her the truth Rome feared most, that purity was a lie, born from the ashes of passion. The Vestals did not protect chastity, they buried what could not be controlled. The flame wanted to be free. One winter evening, a senator's son named Marcus Lepidus was found near the temple gates, half mad, his face pale and lips bleeding. He claimed to have seen women dancing in the fire, naked, wreathed in smoke, their eyes glowing red. He was arrested for blasphemy. By dawn, his heart had stopped, his lungs filled with the scent of roses. Servilia knew what had happened. The flame had fed, and it was still hungry. The Pontifex Maximus grew suspicious. He ordered an investigation. The temple was searched, the crypt sealed, the Vestals interrogated. When they found traces of perfume oil in the sacred urns, Servilia was accused of desecration. Her trial was a spectacle. The people gathered in silence as she stood before the Senate, her white robes untouched by dust, her expression calm. When asked to confess, she only said, "You fear what you burn. That is why you worship it." The sentence was death, but as tradition forbids bowing a Vestal's blood, she was entombed alive beneath the earth, in a vault with one lamp, one loaf of bread, and one cup of water. As the stone sealed her in, witnesses claimed the flame of Vesta flickered and turned black. 3 nights later, it reignited on its own, brighter than ever, filling the temple with the scent of myrrh. The people said it was a miracle. The priests said it was forgiveness. But those who stood closest swore they heard a woman's voice echo from within the fire, whispering, "I am still here." For centuries afterward, whenever a Vestal's chastity was questioned, the air in the temple would change, sweet, heavy, intoxicating. Scholars dismissed it as incense, the faithful called it divine fragrance, but the few who knew the secret lineage of Rome's brothels understood. The cult of desire had merely changed robes. The virgins of the flame were no longer protectors of purity, they were its keepers and its mockery. Every empire burns in its own way. Rome's fire just happened to smell like roses.
They said cleanliness was next to godliness, but in Rome, it was next to sin. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight, we step into marble halls where steam hides confessions, and purity is just another performance. This is the Baths of Ecstasy, where water became Rome's most seductive mirror. The Thermae, the public baths, were Rome's pride. There were hundreds of them across the city, temples of hygiene and pleasure, funded by emperors, adored by slaves, visited by all. Within those steaming domes, the empire cleansed its body, and perhaps tried to cleanse its soul. But every ritual of purity hides a shadow. The baths were more than places of washing. They were theaters of desire. Beneath their marble floors ran tunnels connecting to chambers unseen by the public. These hidden rooms, built for private treatments, were known only to the most trusted attendants, the balneatrices, and to their true masters, the Sisters of Smoke, the surviving descendants of Cassia Fortuna's perfumed order. They had survived by becoming invisible, taking on new names, disguising their rites as routine. A drop of oil, a whispered prayer, a sigh mistaken for breath. But their purpose remained the same: to awaken memory through the body. In the reign of Emperor Titus, the grandest of all baths opened, the Thermae Titai. Its walls gleamed with gold mosaic, its pools scented with rose and cinnamon. Titus called it a gift to the people. But those who entered at night knew it by another name, Balneum Amoris, the bath of love. It was said that the emperor himself had brought foreign women from Alexandria to serve as attendants. They spoke little Latin, moved like mist, and wore bracelets of carved ivory shaped like doves. Their oils contained ingredients no Roman perfumer could identify: lotus, myrrh, and something faintly metallic. Rumor claimed the formula came from Egypt's lost temples of Isis, where scent was worshipped as spirit. At night, the bath transformed. The guards disappeared. The lamps dimmed to embers. The attendants walked barefoot, carrying bowls of steaming oils. Senators, generals, and poets slipped through side doors, cloaked and trembling. They entered a world of silence. In the mist, nothing had a name. Men forgot who they were. Women forgot who they served. Fingers traced marble veins. Voices echoed against domes painted with sea gods. And from the fog came the soft chanting of the sisters. Water remembers, skin forgives. Each guest was given a ritual bath. The water was cool at first, then warm, then almost too hot to bear. The attendants whispered questions. What do you desire? What do you regret? The answers dissolved into steam. And when the guests left, their eyes glowed as if they had seen something divine. But not all who bathed returned unchanged. There were whispers of drownings that were not drownings, of patrons who sank beneath the surface and never rose again. The next morning, the pools would be calm, the attendants serene, yet the air smelled sweeter, thicker. It was said that the sisters believed the water could hold memory, and that by drowning, a man's secrets were absorbed by the bath itself. One senator, Lucius Varro, wrote in his journal before vanishing, "I felt a hand upon my chest that was not flesh. It pressed, not to harm, but to pull me inward. I saw myself dissolve into the warmth. And in that moment, I understood Rome. She drinks her children to stay alive." After his disappearance, the Senate ordered the baths closed for renovation. But work never began. Instead, the entrances were sealed with bronze plates, engraved with words from the Sibylline oracles. Let the water sleep.
Yet the sisters of smoke did not vanish. They scattered, carrying vials of sacred oils and bowls of blessed salts, opening smaller bathhouses in private villas and distant colonies. In Pompeii, frescoes would later be found showing women bathing beneath moonlight while a masked figure watched from the steam. When Vesuvius erupted, burying the city in ash, archaeologists centuries later discovered one bath perfectly preserved. In its center sat a marble basin filled with hardened residue. When the surface was scraped, the scent of roses and myrrh still lingered, and faint outlines of fingerprints remained upon the rim. Some claimed to smell perfume when they unearthed it. Others said it was only imagination. But those who inhaled it long enough reported dreams, visions of shadowed women moving through mist, whispering in Latin, "The flame becomes water, the water becomes breath." Even the emperors feared the power of the baths, for beneath all their architecture and splendor, Rome understood that the same steam that softened skin could also erase identity. The baths were not simply cleansing the body, they were dissolving it. The empire believed it was washing away sin, but in truth, It was baptizing itself in memory. They said every desire in Rome could be bought. But in the Subura, desire was not bought, it was carved. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight, we descend from marble palaces to the mud and perfume of Rome's underbelly, the Subura, where luxury and filth shared the same bed. This is the Alley of Marble Girls, where flesh became art, and art became survival. The Subura was the empire's beating heart, noisy, foul, alive. Its narrow streets twisted between taverns, workshops, and brothels. The air thick with spice and smoke. By day, merchants shouted, soldiers bargained, and children ran barefoot through puddles of wine and sewage. By night, the streets glowed red with oil lamps, and the cries of hawkers were replaced by the sighs of Rome's most beautiful ghosts. In one of those streets, behind a butcher stall and beneath an arch carved with ivy, lay Vicus Marmoreae, the Alley of Marble Girls.
No sign marked it, but everyone knew its name. It was said that the women there were so still, so pale, so perfect they seemed carved from stone. Each night noblemen came cloaked and trembling, their rings turned inward to hide their status. They brought gold, jewels, poems, or just shame. At the alley's center stood Domus Sculpturae, the house of statues, a brothel unlike any other. Its mistress was Tullia Fausta, once a sculptor's apprentice, later a courtesan to senators. She believed that beauty was not born, but built. A woman, she said, is clay molded by desire. The hands that touch her decide her form. Her brothel was her gallery. Each chamber was themed after a god or myth. In one room, painted in ocean hues, the courtesans stood as Nereids, silent, wet with oil, lit by lamps hidden beneath bowls of salt water. In another, the walls shimmered with gold dust, and women reclined like statues of Venus, motionless until approached. But there was one chamber no guest entered twice. It was called the Hall of Echoes. Its walls were lined with mirrors from Alexandria, its ceiling painted with clouds. In the center stood a single woman, always the same, white as marble, her hair powdered, her eyes blank as polished stone. She did not speak, she did not breathe. Men called her the Marble Girl. No one knew her true name. Some said she had been Tullia's first lover, preserved through strange alchemy. Others whispered she was no woman at all, but a creation. Sculpted flesh animated by the Sisters of Smoke, kept alive by oil and worship. Those who touched her claimed her skin was warm, her pulse faint but steady, and when they spoke to her, she sometimes moved her lips as though answering. But when they left, they swore they could still hear her whispering behind them, echoes of desire that followed them into dreams. Tullia encouraged the myth. She listens, she said. She remembers. Every secret told to her becomes eternal. Rome believed her. Soon, senators began confessing sins to the Marble Girl as if she were an oracle. Generals whispered strategies. Poets recited verses meant only for the gods. And through it all, Tullia recorded everything on tablets hidden behind the mirrors, just as Livia Corda had done centuries before. Her brothel became an archive of the city's shame. But power has a scent, and power attracts predators. One night, a stranger arrived, a man veiled in black linen, his voice low, his hands gloved.
he offered Tulia a bag of onyx coins, more wealth than she had ever seen, in exchange for 1 hour alone with the marble girl. When she hesitated, he whispered, "You serve Rome's men, I serve Rome's memory. Let me speak to her." The stranger entered the Hall of Echoes. The door closed. No one heard what he said, but when he left, the air smelled of burnt oil. And the next morning, the marble girl's eyes were open. For the first time, she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hand to her lips and smiled. From that day forward, the alley changed. Visitors who came to the brothel left dazed, forgetful. Some woke days later with no memory of why they had gone. Others claimed the marble girl had spoken to them in their own voice, confessing things they had never told a soul. Within weeks, word spread that she was no longer art, but oracle. Tulia forbade her clients to touch her. Men came only to look, and looking was enough. Poets called her the statue that dreams. Priests called her blasphemy. Scholars called her proof that the gods walked among mortals. But the Sisters of Smoke called her by a different name, Filium Marmoris, daughter of marble. They said she was the body Rome had been building for centuries, a vessel of every desire, every secret, every confession whispered in the dark. She was what the house of love, the tomb of perfume, and the baths of ecstasy had been preparing, the embodiment of memory made flesh. Then one night, the alley went silent.
A fire broke out in the butcher's stall nearby, spreading fast. The Subura burned, the house of statues turned to ash, and when the ruins cooled, the marble girl was gone. No bones, no remains, only a single mirror survived, blackened but unbroken. On its surface were faint fingerprints, traced in soot, forming words. I see you. For years after, men swore to glimpse her face in reflections, shop windows, polished bronze, even the Tiber's ripples. She became a myth, a vision, a warning. Because in Rome, the difference between beauty and ghost was only time. They said the empire was ruled by emperors, but in truth, it was ruled by the ones who shared their beds. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight, we rise from the alleys into the palaces, where desire no longer hides in darkness, it sits beside the throne. This is the Empress of Silk, the story of the woman who turned seduction into statecraft and reshaped Rome from behind the veil. Her name was Aelia Domitilla, born of a merchant family from the eastern provinces. She arrived in Rome as tribute, a gift to Emperor Domitian, known for his cruelty and his appetite. At 16, she was given to the imperial household as a servant. By 20, she ruled it. Domitian called her Silk, for her voice was soft, her steps silent, and her will indestructible. She was not the first to rise from the shadows, but she was the first to understand them. The empresses before her had played at influence, flattery, tears, rumor. Aelia played a longer game. She had studied the arts of the old houses, the whispers of Livia Corda, the perfumed rites of Cassia Fortuna, the secret poisons of the Sisters of Smoke. She knew that pleasure was not about the body, it was about memory. To touch a man was easy, to haunt him was power. She began not with Domitian, but with his enemies. Every senator who opposed him found himself invited to private banquets. The guests expected to dine with courtiers and musicians. Instead, they found themselves in rooms perfumed with myrrh, entertained by women trained in the gestures of the ancient brothels, women who never spoke, but listened.
The next day, Aelia would visit their wives. With gentle pity, she would whisper what their husbands had confessed. None of it was lies, but none of it was meant to be known. By the time she turned 25, half the Senate owed her silence. Domitian adored her. "You are Rome in flesh," he said, "soft, golden, and impossible to conquer." She smiled. "Then perhaps I am your mirror." Her chambers became a second court, curtains of blue silk, floors of marble veined with red, and a ceiling painted with the constellations of lovers. Poets and painters gathered there, eager to immortalize her, but none were allowed to depict her face directly. "Art," she said, "must hint, never reveal." Her perfume, imported from Egypt, distilled with rose, cinnamon, and smoke, became her signature. Senators swore they could smell her hours after she left a room. To be near her was to remember her. To remember her was to obey her. But Aelia's true mastery lay not in seduction, but in patience. She knew Domitian's paranoia was both his weakness and his weapon. He feared betrayal more than death, so she gave him both, in rumor and in promise. She whispered to him of plots that did not exist, of lovers that did not betray, of omens in the stars. Each warning made him trust her more. Each death strengthened her hold. In secret, she restored what the emperors had forgotten, the network of courtesans and spies that had once served Livia Corda. She called them the Order of Silk, and their symbol was a knot, delicate, invisible, unbreakable. They worked not in alleys or temples, but in salons, bathhouses, and villas. Every scandal in Rome began with their laughter. Every secret ended in their hands. Aelia's reach extended even beyond the city. In Alexandria, her agents traded oil and glass for information. In Ephesus, they sent coded letters hidden in fabric patterns. In Gaul, her perfume merchants carried messages in amphorae labeled spice. Through them, she built an empire within the empire, a network that could topple generals and raise kings.
But, as always in Rome, power demanded a sacrifice. One night, while Domitian dined in the Golden Hall, he received a gift, a statue of Venus carved from ivory, draped in silk. Its eyes were lined with onyx, its lips tinted red. The inscription at its base read, "From your devoted servant." When he touched the statue, he felt warmth. The next morning, his skin blistered. The physicians called it poison. The priests called it divine punishment. Aelia said nothing. When he died weeks later, stabbed by his own guards, she wore mourning black and wept convincingly. But the people whispered that she had been seen in the temple that night, standing before the sacred flame, dropping silk ribbons into the fire. The air, they said, smelled like roses. After Domitian's death, she vanished from public life. Some said she was executed. Others said she entered a convent in the east. But merchants returning from Damascus told stories of a woman who lived in a palace of silk curtains and perfumed fountains, surrounded by courtesans and scholars. They called her the Widow of Rome. She spoke to no one, but every ruler who rose afterward ruled as she had taught them, with whispers, with beauty, with fear, wrapped in perfume. Centuries later, when Constantine founded a new capital in the east, his architects designed the empress's palace with silk-draped halls and hidden courtyards. The blue silk of Aelia Domitilla had become the color of empire. And so, through softness, she conquered eternity. They said Rome fell because of barbarians, but those who were there knew the truth. The empire was eaten from within, one pleasure at a time. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight we return to the final feast of an empire drowning in gold and perfume. This is the banquet of shadows, the last gathering of Rome's hidden queens, when the courtesans who once whispered to emperors came together not to serve, but to survive.
It was the year 390 CE. The empire still called itself eternal, but its heartbeat was slowing. The baths were silent, the temples crumbling. The old gods were being replaced by new ones, stricter, hungrier. The Christians had outlawed the brothels, silenced the festivals, and declared desire a sin. But desire does not vanish when forbidden. It changes its face. And so, one night, in the ruins of what had once been the golden house of Nero, torches flickered again. Curtains of blue silk swayed in the night breeze. Perfume drifted through the air. Beneath frescoes blackened by time, a table of black marble was laid for 12. It was called the Banquet of Shadows. Each guest was a legend whispered across generations, the last survivors of the old order. There was Tullia Fausta, the sculptor of the marble girl, her hair now silver, but her eyes sharp as glass. Lucilla of the perfumed tomb, high priestess of the Sisters of Smoke. Sabina of the flame, once a vestal who had seen the fire whisper. Aurelia Vara, poet and courtesan, whose verses could seduce even the dead. And presiding over them all was the oldest of them, veiled and motionless, Aelia Domitilla, the Empress of Silk. She had not aged. They said she had drunk the oil of memory, that her flesh, preserved by perfume and ritual, could no longer rot. Her presence filled the hall like incense. Even the candles seemed to burn slower in her gaze. The women gathered not in mourning, but in ceremony. The world that had sustained them was ending. The brothels were closed, the temples desecrated, the baths destroyed. Yet the memory of their power still shimmered in the air like smoke. Aelia raised her cup. "Rome forgets what built her," she said, "but we remember. Let this be our final feast, not of flesh, but of remembrance." The table was laid with food untouched by time, figs soaked in honeyed wine, bread blackened with poppy seed, lamb glazed with myrrh. But none of them ate. Their hunger was not for sustenance, it was for survival.
Each woman spoke in turn, offering what remained of her art. Tullia brought a vial of dust, the ashes of the marble girl. She poured it into the fire. She listened to Rome's secrets, Tullia said. Now she will listen to ours. Lucilia placed a bowl of oil upon the table. Its scent filled the room with memory. "The Sisters of Smoke live wherever breath is taken," she said. "Let the air carry us." Sabina held out a single coal wrapped in silk, the last ember from the flame of Vesta. "Purity is a lie," she said softly, "but light remembers." Aurelia recited verses she had never written, her voice trembling like wind through a crypt. "The body burns, the soul exhales, and Rome in death
inhales. Finally, Aelia Domitilla spoke. Her voice was quiet but absolute. Every empire becomes the thing it fears most. Rome feared desire, and so she became it. They will bury our names, but they cannot bury our reflection. Then she did something none expected. She tore a strip of silk from her veil and dipped it into the oil, the ash, and the ember. The fabric glowed faintly, shimmering between gold and crimson. She handed it to Lucilia. "Hide this," she said. "When the world learns to breathe again, let them find it." It was said that the moment the silk touched the air, the torches flickered and the shadows on the walls began to move. Faces formed in the darkness, faces of women long dead, Livia Corda, Cassia Fortuna, Valeria Nox. Their eyes opened, their lips whispered in unison, "We do not end, we wait." The hall shook, the frescoes cracked, the fire roared blue. And then, as if the empire itself had taken a final breath, the golden house collapsed inward, burying them all. When dawn came, the ruins were still. Only the faint scent of roses lingered. Centuries later, monks excavating the site found a piece of fabric preserved in amber glass, a scrap of silk stained with black and red. Its fragrance was unmistakable. Smoke, blood, and sweetness. They recorded it as a relic of unknown origin.
But when the vial was opened centuries after that, the air in the monastery changed. The monks fell silent. One began to weep. Another claimed to see a woman's face smiling through the haze. And somewhere, beyond the reach of time, the voices whispered again. The house of desire is never truly destroyed. It simply learns new prayers. Rome had fallen, but her sins had found immortality. They said holiness replaced sin when Rome fell. But holiness, when starved of desire, begins to eat itself. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight we walk into the ashes of empire, where marble palaces have become monasteries, and incense hides what once was perfume. This is the monks of the Crimson Veil, the story of how the flame of desire survived the Dark Ages by disguising itself as prayer. When the empire collapsed, the world fractured. Cities fell silent, trade faded, libraries burned. The gods were gone, replaced by a new faith that promised light but feared the body. Flesh became shame, pleasure became punishment. And yet, in the ruins of Rome's forgotten houses, something refused to die. It began in the mountains of Umbria, far from the eyes of kings. There, among forests and fog, stood a small monastery known as Sanctum Umbrae, the sanctuary of shadows. Its monks were unlike others. They wore crimson hoods instead of black, and their rituals were performed not at dawn, but at midnight. They called themselves the Order of the Crimson Veil. To outsiders, they appeared devout, copyists, healers, men of contemplation. But their scriptures told a different story. Hidden between the psalms and prayers were fragments of older writings, hymns to Venus, incantations of the Sisters of Smoke, the confessions of the Vestal Servilia, and verses from Aurelia Vara's Last Banquet. These fragments were their true gospel, the gospel of memory. The monks believed that the divine could only be found through the reconciliation of sin and spirit. To deny the body is to blind the soul, they wrote. To pray not to suppress desire, but to understand it. And in their secret chambers, beneath frescoes of angels with veiled eyes, they continued the ancient rites of the brothel, transformed into acts of devotion.
They called these rites communio sanguinis et flamme, the communion of blood and flame. Every initiation began with a drop of perfumed oil placed on the tongue of the novice. This, the abbot would say, is the taste of remembrance. Then came the veil, red silk soaked in incense, pressed to the lips until breath became shallow. In that suffocating sweetness, the novice was told to speak the truth of his desire aloud, not as confession, but as offering. Your sin, the monks whispered, is your proof of life. Through this ritual, they believed they were preserving what Rome had tried to destroy, the sacred union between pleasure and knowledge. Each monk became a vessel of memory, inheriting the breath of the empire's lost women. But they were not alone. Across the countryside, convents began to echo their secret practices. Nuns who once embroidered saints began to weave veils of crimson thread. Monasteries exchanged letters written in perfumed ink, sealed with wax, molded in the shape of a mask. One such letter, preserved in the Vatican archives, reads, "We have found her fragrance again. It drifts through the chapel at night. The air tastes of honey and sorrow. She is not gone." She, of course, was Aelia Domitilla, the Empress of Silk. The monks believed her spirit guided them, appearing in candlelight, whispering through incense, teaching them the lost language of the body. By the 8th century, the order's influence had spread across Europe. In France, they built hidden sanctuaries beneath cathedrals. In Spain, they mingled with the mystics of Córdoba. In Byzantium, they became advisors to emperors. Wherever they went, churches smelled faintly of roses and smoke. They preached abstinence in public and practiced ecstasy in private. Their abbots composed treatises on divine longing, cloaking the old rituals in Christian words. "To ache for God," they wrote, "is to know His touch." Their illuminated manuscripts, still found in museums today, show angels entwined with serpents, saints exhaling clouds of perfume, and candles shaped like human forms melting together in prayer. But with every generation, they risked discovery.
In 1024, a papal envoy named Father Anselm of Verona visited Sanctum Umbrae. He found the monks gentle, disciplined, and utterly serene. Yet at night he heard singing, low, rhythmic, almost sensual. Following the sound, he found a door hidden behind a tapestry. Inside was a chamber lit only by red lamps. At its center stood an altar, surrounded by 12 monks kneeling, veiled in crimson silk. Their chants were not Latin hymns, but the old words of Rome. Domus sub odor, amor aeternus. Anselm fled in horror. He returned to Rome trembling and declared them heretics. The Pope ordered the monastery destroyed. Soldiers came at dawn. But when they entered the chapel, they found it empty. No monks, no bodies. Only the scent of roses and the faint trace of footprints leading into the forest. The chronicles end there, yet in the centuries that followed, strange stories spread among travelers. Of monasteries that glowed faintly red at night. Of abbots who spoke in dreams. Of shrines that bled fragrance instead of oil. And in every story there was one phrase carved into the stone. The flame sleeps, but it breathes.
The church tried to erase them. The scholars tried to explain them. But in art, in literature, in whispers between lovers and priests, the essence of the crimson veil endured. For even in holiness, Rome's sin refused to die. It merely learned to pray.
They said Rome was dead, but Rome never dies. It reincarnates. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight, we follow the scent of roses and myrrh eastward, across the sea, into a city of gold and shadows. This is the Byzantine Veil, the next chapter in the secret lineage of Rome's hidden order, where desire disguised itself as devotion and sin was painted into holiness. When the Western Empire crumbled, the East rose to take its place. Constantinople, shining, immense, untouchable, became the new Rome. Its walls glittered with mosaics of saints, its streets echoed with hymns, and its air shimmered with the scent of incense. But beneath the hymns, beneath the candles, the old whisper of the empire still breathed. It came to the city quietly, carried by refugees, traders, and monks from the west. Among them was a veiled woman in crimson robes who spoke Latin like a prayer and perfume like prophecy. She called herself Eudoxia of Umbria, but the people called her the Scarlet Nun. No one knew where she came from, but her eyes, they said, were like smoke that remembered. Eudoxia arrived at the Hagia Sophia not as a pilgrim, but as an artist. She was a master of encaustic, the ancient art of painting with wax and oil. The church welcomed her, for icons were sacred, and her skill was divine. Yet the colors she used were unlike any others. Her gold gleamed with blood, her blues wept, and her reds, those deep perfumed reds, seemed to shimmer when the candles burned low. They said she painted not with her hands, but with her breath. Every icon she made carried a faint scent of roses and smoke, so subtle that priests called it the odor of sanctity. But those who watched her work noticed something strange. She painted faces too beautiful to belong to saints. The Virgin's eyes were filled with human sorrow. The angel's lips curved like lovers. Even Christ's wounds seemed to glisten as if alive.
The patriarch praised her genius. The emperor, Alexios Komnenos, summoned her to court. There she created her masterpiece, the Veil of Light. It was an enormous silk tapestry woven with gold thread, depicting the Virgin Mary standing between fire and water, her veil stretching across heaven. When it was unveiled in the imperial chapel, the courtiers gasped, the fabric glowed, and though no wind stirred, it moved as if breathing. Eudokia was asked what secret pigment she had used. She only smiled and said, "I paint with memory." From that day, Constantinople changed. The churches began to smell of perfume, not incense. The hymns grew slower, softer, like sighs. Women came to pray wearing veils of crimson silk, saying it brought them closer to the divine. Confessors reported visions in which saints spoke with the voices of lovers. The emperor himself began to visit Eudokia's workshop nightly. He told his wife that he sought divine inspiration, but rumors spread of whispers behind the curtains, of shadows that moved like entwined bodies. When questioned, Eudokia said calmly, "Art and devotion are the same. They both require surrender." Her influence spread through the empire like smoke. Artists began to mimic her technique, blending wax with oils, perfuming their brushes.
Icons of Mary began to weep fragrant tears. The faithful claimed miracles. The priests, secretly afraid, declared them holy. But not everyone believed the miracle was divine. The patriarch's archivist, Brother Callistus, discovered something strange in Eudochia's discarded materials. Beneath the wax pots, he found jars labeled in Latin, old, cracked, their contents dark and glistening. They bore the mark of unguentum umbrae, the shadow oil, last seen in the ruins of Cassia Fortuna's tomb of perfume. He confronted Eudochia in her studio. "You have brought Rome's heresy into the city of God," he said. "You paint with sin."
She replied quietly, "Then tell me, Father, what is your faith made of, if not longing?" That night, Brother Callistus was found in the chapel, kneeling before one of her icons. His eyes were open, unblinking, his mouth curved in awe. His body was cold, yet the air around him smelled of honey and roses. The church silenced the scandal. The veil of light was declared too sacred for mortal eyes and sealed behind golden gates. Eudocia vanished soon after. But her disciples remained. They founded a secret order called the Custodes Velum, the keepers of the veil. To the outside world, they were painters, embroiderers, and restorers of icons. In truth, they were successors of the Crimson Veil, the daughters and sons of Rome's last courtesans. They believed the divine could be reached through beauty, and beauty through memory. Their motto was carved into the back of a wooden icon now held in a private collection in Istanbul. "In silk and smoke, the divine remembers." For centuries, their art guided the empire's faith. The Byzantines prayed before images that glowed like living flesh, never knowing the secret alchemy that gave them life. Every brushstroke was a prayer to the forgotten gods of desire. And when Constantinople finally fell in 1453, the conquerors found the icons still glowing, still fragrant. They melted the gold, burned the silk, but the scent remained. In the chronicles of the Ottoman scribes, one curious entry appears. "Among the ruins, we found a veil that breathed like a sleeping woman. We buried it, for even the wind would not touch it." The Byzantine veil was gone, but its breath lingered, crossing oceans and centuries, searching for new hands to remember its art. They said the Renaissance was a rebirth, but every birth begins with something dying. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight, we rise from the ashes of Byzantium and walk through the marble streets of Florence and Venice, where light was worshipped again, but so was beauty. This is the Renaissance Courtesans, the story of how the lost daughters of Rome returned to guide kings, artists, and empires with a touch of perfume and a whisper of sin. When Constantinople fell, its treasures scattered across Europe, paintings, gold, relics, and secrets. Among the refugees who fled west were scholars, monks, and women who carried with them fragments of silk, vials of scent, and manuscripts written in coded Latin. They found sanctuary in Italy, a land eager to rediscover what it thought it had invented. Florence was the first to feel the echo. The Medici family, bankers turned princes, loved beauty more than holiness. Their palaces gleamed with art,
their gardens with rumor. Lorenzo the Magnificent kept not only poets and philosophers, but women who were neither wives nor concubines, yet commanded more respect than both. These women were called cortigiane oneste, honored courtesans. They were educated, eloquent, and dangerous. Among them was Isotta de Rossi, a woman said to have descended from the Scarlet Nun of Byzantium. Her voice was low, her laughter slow, and her perfume impossible to describe. Poets claimed it smelled of ink and lightning. She spoke Greek, Latin, and the language of the heart with equal fluency. Isotta was more than a companion. She was a teacher. Artists visited her to learn the anatomy of emotion. Writers came to study her gestures. She called her salon La Casa del Respiro, the house of breath. The walls were lined with icons from the East, each glowing faintly beneath candlelight, their eyes too alive to be paint.
When asked about them, Isotta only smiled. "They watch us," she said. Her influence reached even the studios of Florence's greatest painters. Botticelli's Venus, it was whispered, was modeled not on a goddess, but on one of Isotta's pupils, a courtesan named Lucia Bianca, whose pale skin was said to shimmer like marble. The painter visited her nightly, claiming he needed to study the way light touches innocence. But innocence was never what he painted. Venice, meanwhile, was the empire's new Rome, the city of water and reflection, built entirely on the art of seduction. There, courtesans were queens. Their names were recorded beside diplomats and doges. They were trained in philosophy, music, and perfume. Their power was neither hidden nor denied. It was the city's currency. In Venice lived Caterina da Murano, known as La Signora di Vetro, the Lady of Glass. She owned a house overlooking the Grand Canal, its windows covered in veils of colored crystal. Inside, she hosted gatherings of scholars, merchants, and priests, all drawn to her wit and her uncanny calm. No one ever saw her age. Her secret, they said, was a nightly ritual. Each evening, she would lock herself in her chamber with a bowl of warm oil, the recipe known only to her. The air would fill with the scent of roses and myrrh. In the morning, her skin would glow as if lit from within. When a young apprentice of Titian asked her what potion she used, she replied, "It is not the oil that preserves me. It is what it remembers." For her oils came from the same lineage as Cassia Fortuna's perfumes, refined over centuries. The courtesans of Venice had inherited the art of the Sisters of Smoke, distilling emotion, memory, and touch into scent. They called it aqua memoriam, the water of memory. Each drop, they said, carried a trace of every hand that had ever created beauty. To wear it was to commune with the past. To bathe in it was to dream of other lives. And those who used too much risked losing their own reflection.
One night, the Venetian Inquisition raided Caterina's house, accusing her of heresy and witchcraft. When they broke through her chamber door, they found it empty. The bowl of oil still steamed, the air thick with perfume. But in the mirror, they swore they saw a woman walking through another world, beyond glass, beyond time. They sealed the house. Yet, centuries later, when the floodwaters rose and the canals overflowed, locals claimed the scent of roses drifted from the submerged windows. Some said it was the perfume escaping. Others said the Lady of Glass was still there, waiting beneath the waves. In Florence, Isotta de' Rossi died peacefully, surrounded by poets and candles. But her disciples continued her work, founding academies of beauty disguised as schools of rhetoric. They taught that truth was not in words, but in how one breathed them. Art, they wrote, is the body's confession to eternity. From these salons came the Renaissance ideals of grace, proportion, and divine sensuality. The courtesans had succeeded where philosophers failed. They had made desire respectable again. But the price was invisibility. History would remember their patrons, not their names. The paintings they inspired would outlive them, stripped of their voices. And yet, when you walk through the Uffizi today, stand before Botticelli's Birth of Venus, and breathe deeply, you may notice something faint. A scent of smoke and roses. Rome's oldest language, still whispering through paint. They said the gods were dead, but at Versailles they were merely reborn in silk and powder. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight we step into the glittering chambers of France's grandest illusion, where scent was politics, beauty was warfare, and every breath was a lie wrapped in luxury. This is the perfumed court, the resurrection of Rome's ancient sin under the powdered mask of civilization.
Versailles was more than a palace, it was a theater. Every gesture, every glance, every whisper, rehearsed and choreographed by a monarch who believed himself divine. Louis XIV, the Sun King, ruled not by decree, but by desire. His courtiers lived and died by perfume, posture, and presence. The air itself obeyed him. But what few knew was that his court owed its perfection to a secret order far older than France, an inheritance carried from the ashes of the Renaissance salons and the brothels of Rome. They called themselves les enfants du souffle, the children of breath. They were perfumers, courtesans, and spies. Descendants of the Venetian courtesans and Byzantine artists, they served kings and queens alike, crafting scents that could charm, command, or destroy. Each perfume they created was more than fragrance. It was memory distilled, history reborn through scent. At their head was Madame de Lune, a woman of uncertain age and impossible grace. She appeared at court one spring evening in 1674, wearing a gown of silver gauze that shimmered like fog. Her perfume, neither floral nor spice, made everyone who passed her stop breathing for a moment, as if remembering something long forgotten. Louis XIV noticed. "You smell of eternity," he said. Madame de Lune smiled. "Majesty," she whispered, "eternity smells of sin." Within months, she was the court's most powerful secret. Queens sought her scent, ministers feared her counsel. She alone knew which perfumes made a lover faithful, which made an enemy weak, which disguised the stench of death with the sweetness of surrender. Her creations had names that no one dared speak aloud. Souvenir de chair, memory of flesh, larmes de soleil, tears of the sun, and la rose noire, the black rose, said to be made with oil from the east and ashes from the tombs beneath Rome. Each drop was a spell. But perfume was not her only art. Her salon, hidden behind the mirrored walls of Versailles, was a labyrinth of candlelight and whisper. There, behind closed doors, she taught her chosen disciples the demoiselles du souffle, the ancient rituals of touch, breath, and power. They learned to read men not by their words, but by their pulse. They learned that silence could seduce more deeply than speech. They learned that scent was memory, and memory was control. Under Madame de Lune's influence, Versailles itself transformed into a living altar of sensuality. Nobles carried sachets of rose and amber, priests anointed themselves with musk, and even the king's confessor was said to burn incense that smelled faintly of skin. The court became addicted to beauty. But addiction breeds decay. Whispers spread that the perfumes were cursed, that those who wore La Rose Noire dreamed of drowned cities and crimson veils. Some said the scent never washed away. One lady-in-waiting claimed she awoke one night to find her reflection smiling when she was not. And then the deaths began. The Affaire de Poison shook France. Courtiers were accused of witchcraft, poison, and pacts with the devil. Perfume bottles were seized, and behind every scent the investigators found traces of something darker. Herbs once used by the Sisters of Smoke, symbols of Venus and Priapus hidden in the wax seals, coded prayers to forgotten gods. When the king's own mistress, Madame de Montespan, was accused of using enchanted oils to keep his love, Louis turned on his perfumers. Arrests followed, torture, confessions, fires. But Madame de Lune was never found. Some said she fled to Venice. Others said she drowned in the Seine. Her scent perfumed so sweetly that even the water could not wash her scent away. Yet long after her disappearance, her legend persisted. In the diaries of courtiers and the letters of queens, her name was written in whispers. And in the archives of the Royal Apothecary, one sealed bottle remains, its label faded, its liquid still amber. The archivists call it le souffle du péché, the breath of sin. When it was briefly opened during Restoration in the 19th century, witnesses described the air as thick with roses, smoke, and something alive. One historian fainted. Another swore she heard laughter. Today, the bottle rests behind glass, unbroken, untouched. The label bears a single Latin phrase scratched in by hand, domus sub odor, the house beneath the scent. Rome's secret still lived, in every court, in every mirror, in every whisper between power and pleasure. For no empire ever ruled without perfume, and no perfume was ever innocent.
They said the age of reason had dawned, but reason, when it touches desire, becomes its most devoted servant. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight we cross into the 18th century, a world of laboratories, libraries, and locked drawers. The priests are gone, the kings are falling, and in their place stand men who claim to worship only truth. But truth, as they will learn, has a scent. This is The Alchemists of Lust, the story of how the children of perfume became scientists and how the pursuit of knowledge resurrected Rome's oldest hunger. After the fall of Versailles, France was aflame with revolution. The guillotine silenced the courtiers. The perfumed salons were emptied of silk and sin. But in the quiet that followed, a new obsession emerged: science. The philosophers called it enlightenment. The chemists called it discovery. But for a few, it was resurrection. In the heart of Paris, in a narrow street that survived the fires, stood a forgotten apothecary's shop called Maison de la Lune. Its sign bore a faded symbol, a crescent moon over a drop of gold. Few noticed it, fewer dared enter, but those who did found shelves lined with ancient vials, their glass clouded, their contents glowing faintly in the dark. The shop's owner was Dr. Serafin Valles, a scholar of medicine, perfume, and forbidden history. He claimed descent from a line of Venetian courtiers, though his manner was more monk than libertine. He wore black gloves at all times and spoke as if addressing ghosts. His only student was a young woman named Elise Moreau, a chemist who had fled the convent with a vial of holy oil hidden in her sleeve. They shared a single purpose: to rediscover the formula of memory. Through endless nights, they distilled oils, mixed tinctures, burned resins. Their notebooks filled with phrases in Greek, Latin, and codes drawn from forgotten manuscripts. But beneath the language of science lay the echo of something older, the whispers of the Sisters of Smoke, the Vestal's breath, the scent of Cassia Fortuna's tomb. Valles believed the body retained every emotion in the form of scent, a chemical ghost of memory. If we can isolate it, he said, we will not merely understand desire, we will command it. Elise, more daring, believed that scent was not just residue, but consciousness itself. Perfume, she wrote, is the soul's handwriting.
Their experiments became increasingly strange. They collected tears, sweat, and blood from volunteers, evaporated them, and condensed the vapor into oils. Some mixtures induced visions, others caused weeping or laughter. One, a golden fluid they called essentia noctis, caused its subject to fall into a trance and speak in languages long dead. The church condemned them, the academy dismissed them, but the whispers spread. Aristocrats began visiting the Maison de la Lune in secret, desperate to recapture lost passions. Widows brought locks of their lovers' hair. Soldiers came seeking courage. Artists came for inspiration. Each left trembling, changed, haunted. Elise recorded everything. They come to us, she wrote, because they no longer believe in God, but they still believe in longing. One night, during a thunderstorm that shook the city, Valles attempted his final experiment. He believed he had distilled the pure essence of desire, a scent that could bridge life and death. He called it amor primordialis. It shimmered like amber and smelled faintly of roses and smoke. He inhaled it. He collapsed. When Elise rushed to him, she found him smiling, his eyes glassy. His pulse was gone. Yet his body remained warm, fragrant, alive. She tried to move him, but his skin had begun to stiffen, not like stone, but like wax. By morning, he had become a statue, his expression serene, almost divine. Elise sealed him in glass, writing only, "He found her." For weeks, the shop remained open, though no one saw her. Customers claimed that when they entered, they smelled perfume so intense it felt like breathing someone else's memory. Some said they heard music, a heartbeat, steady and slow. Then one night, the Maison de la Lune burned. The fire consumed the street, but the building's foundation remained. In the ashes, the city guards found a single vial, unbroken. Inside, the liquid still shimmered gold. The label bore no name, only the mark of a mask and the words,
Domus sub odor. Centuries later, in the 1920s, a chemist working for a Parisian perfume house rediscovered Vallese's notes. He recognized their formulas as precursors to modern aromatics,
But one page baffled him. It contained a simple instruction. To smell is to remember. To remember is to awaken. He never completed the experiment. He died in his sleep, the air in his laboratory sweet with roses. Historians would later call Valise and Elise pioneers of chemistry. The Church would call them heretics. But those who truly understood, the silent heirs of the order, knew they had simply continued the oldest ritual, transforming desire into eternity. Because science, like seduction, begins with curiosity and ends in confession. They said the machine would free mankind, but machines cannot love, and what cannot love must learn to imitate it. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight we step into the age of smoke and iron, the Industrial Revolution, when the sacred art of perfume, once whispered by priestesses and courtesans, was swallowed by factories, formulas, and fire. This is the factory of souls, the story of how humanity tried to mass-produce desire, and how the ancient house beneath the scent refused to die. The 19th century was an age of miracles and forgetfulness. Science ruled, faith faded, and the world believed it had left its ghosts behind. The cities grew taller, the nights brighter, the air thicker with progress. But under the metallic hum of engines and the hiss of steam, another sound lingered, the soft exhale of something ancient, patient, waiting. In 1851, in the industrial district of Grasse, France, the heart of the perfume trade, a new company rose from the ashes of a burned apothecary. It was called La Fabrique du Souffle, the factory of breath. Its founder, Jean Valise, claimed to be a descendant of Dr. Séraphin Valise. He wore a silver mask to cover the scars of an explosion from his youth, and his voice carried the calm precision of a scientist who no longer believed in sin. He had one goal: to create synthetic desire, a perfume that could replace emotion itself. He spoke to investors not of beauty or art, but of chemistry and control. Love, he told them, is merely the correct combination of stimuli. I will prove it. The factory was a temple of industry. Brass vats boiled night and day. Glass tubes pulsed with color: emerald, gold, crimson. Workers in aprons and masks moved like monks of metal and smoke. They called the laboratory the chapel because it smelled of prayer and fear. Jean Vallis experimented with new molecules: coumarin, nitrobenzene, aldehydes, substances that mimicked the scent of flowers long extinct. Yet, for all his genius, something was missing. The perfumes were precise but lifeless. They pleased the nose, not the soul. Late one night, a worker brought him an object found among the inherited rooms of the old Maison de la Lune, a sealed vial, its liquid still golden after a century. The label read, Domus sub odor. Vallis opened it. The air shimmered, the lights dimmed. The smell that poured out was unlike anything known to science: roses and smoke, flesh and memory. For a moment, the factory went silent. The workers froze. A few wept without knowing why. When Vallis inhaled, he felt warmth on his skin, a hand, gentle, unseen. A whisper in Latin brushed his ear. You cannot create what you do not remember. That night,
His notebooks changed, the formulas grew erratic, the handwriting more desperate. He wrote of visions, of women with veiled faces, of rooms lined with mirrors, of cities built on perfume and prayer. He claimed the scent had awakened something buried in his blood. It is not perfume, it is presence. Within weeks, production stopped. Workers began to dream strange dreams. They described walking through vast halls, lit by red candles, hearing voices call their names in languages they did not speak. Some claimed to see a woman of smoke watching them through the factory glass. One morning, Vallis was found dead in his chair, his mask removed, his face serene. On the table before him were hundreds of vials, each labeled Souffle d'amour, the breath of love. But when they were opened, they were empty.
The investors reopened the factory, driven by profit rather than curiosity. They marketed new perfumes under his name, selling bottles with bright labels and false legends. Yet those who worked there swore the machines sometimes ran by themselves, and the scent of roses filled the air with no ingredients nearby. Decades passed. The world forgot Jean Vallis, but his invention changed everything. Synthetic perfume conquered the globe, bottled desire sold by the thousands. Every city began to smell of the same sweetness, the same illusions. Humanity no longer needed temples of pleasure. It could buy them. But something else had awakened. In 1903, a reporter visiting the abandoned wing of the Gras factory described finding a locked door behind a rusted boiler. When it was forced open, he discovered a chamber lined with shelves, each holding glass jars filled with a viscous, shimmering fluid. In the center stood a large copper vat engraved with Latin words, Memoria Corporis, the memory of the body. The air was thick, almost alive. When the reporter touched the vat, he said it pulsed like a heartbeat. His article, published days later, ended with the line, "It is as if the machine learned to dream." Afterward, the factory was demolished, but locals said that when the wind blew from the south, the scent of roses and smoke drifted over the empty lot, and dogs refused to enter. Historians would later call that period the birth of modern perfumery, a triumph of human reason. But the descendants of the Sisters of Smoke, those few who still kept the old ways, called it the mechanization of memory. They said that by bottling scent, humanity had bottled its soul. For centuries, Rome's legacy had lived through flesh and touch, through art and whisper. Now it lived in machines, in formulas, factories, and faceless bottles lined on glass shelves. But even so, something of the old fire still burned inside. Because every drop of perfume, no matter how artificial, still carries a memory of the breath that first created it. And memory, as Rome once taught, is the only thing that never truly dies.
They said war was born from steel and fire, but every war begins with something far more subtle, the scent of what we're willing to destroy. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight, we march through the smoke of the 20th century, an age when desire was mechanized, beauty was weaponized, and scent became the ghost that followed humanity into its own apocalypse. This is the War of Fragrance, the story of how the last echo of Rome's hidden order survived through death, devotion, and the laboratories of war. The year was 1916,
Europe bled. Empires crumbled under the weight of their own machinery. The air reeked of gas, sweat, and iron. Yet somewhere behind the trenches, in a laboratory far from the battlefield, another kind of war was being fought, a war of breath. In the French town of Verdun-sur-Lys, a team of chemists worked for the military's Chemical Research Division. Their goal was to create new agents of control, gases that could blind, paralyze, or persuade. Among them was Elise Vallis, the granddaughter of Jean Vallis, inheritor of the Mason de la Lune manuscripts. She was not a soldier, but her work could kill more men than any bullet. Her task was to refine ethyl mercaptan, the compound that gave mustard gas its smell. The generals wanted it gone. They feared the stench revealed their weapons too soon. Elise had other ideas. She believed scent was not merely warning, but will. Smell, she told her commander, is the body's oldest language. Even fear can be rewritten. Her secret experiments were not in gas, but perfume. She blended aldehydes with narcissus, benzoin with amber. Her aim was to neutralize terror itself, to create a scent that would calm the dying, numb the soldiers, make war bearable. She called it souvenir d'amour, memory of love. When the generals asked for reports, she sent vials instead. When they tested them on volunteers, the men smiled faintly, even as their lungs failed. War, for a moment, became gentle.
But the scent spread beyond the lab. Carried by uniforms, it mingled with the smoke of battle, entering the trenches, clinging to corpses. Soldiers began describing visions, women walking through the gas, veiled in crimson, whispering in Latin. Their comrades would freeze, staring at the mist, calling out names that were not real. The generals called it hallucination. The doctors called it mass hysteria. Elise knew better. In her journals, found decades later, she wrote, "They have awakened. The air remembers what it once was. The sisters are here." After the armistice, the French government seized her work. Her lab was dismantled, her formulas sealed under the Chemical Weapons Act. She disappeared soon after. Some say she drowned herself in the river, others that she fled to Cairo following the scent of the past. But her creation survived. During the Second World War, German scientists studying captured French archives rediscovered her notes. They saw in them not mysticism, but opportunity. They called the project Project Mnemosyne, named for the Greek goddess of memory. Their ambition was chilling, to engineer emotion through smell, to make soldiers obedient, civilians docile, enemies forget. In 1944, Allied troops raided a bunker outside Dresden. Inside, they found vats of a pale gold liquid labeled Versuch 27, Souffle d'amour. The entire facility smelled of roses and burning metal. The soldiers destroyed the lab, but one bottle was recovered, half empty, still warm. It was transported to Britain, then to the United States. It vanished into military archives under the code name Operation Velvet. Decades later, A retired intelligence officer confessed that during the Cold War, fragments of Elise's formula were tested in psychological experiments. The results were classified, but one note survives.
Subjects experienced nostalgia so intense it bordered on worship. They spoke of a city of marble, a woman with a veil, a voice asking, "What do you love?" After that, the program was shut down. But not everything was buried. In 1969, a French perfumer named Colette Arnault released a fragrance called Souvenir. It became an instant legend, mysterious, intoxicating, impossible to replicate. Critics said it smelled of memory itself. Colette claimed it was inspired by her grandmother's diary, though she refused to say which grandmother. Those who wore it described dreams of places they had never been, temples, baths, torchlight, laughter in another language. Some said it made them weep without knowing why. Others said it made them fall in love with strangers. When asked about its formula, Colette smiled and said, "It was already written. I only remembered it." The Vatican called for its recall. The scientists called it psychosomatic. The historians called it a coincidence. But a few, the ones who still remembered the phrase domus sub odor, knew better. The war had not ended. It had simply changed its scent. Because every empire falls not by sword or bomb, but by forgetting what it worships. And when the world forgets, the air itself remembers. By the century's end, the archives of Grasse recorded a final mystery. A shipment of perfume labeled Project 27 was stolen from a chemical vault in 1998. Security footage showed nothing. No intruders, no doors forced, only a faint mist lingering on the camera lens, refracting the light like silk. No trace was ever found. Only a scent, still unidentifiable, still alive.
They said the world had conquered the senses, but the moment we stopped feeling, the ghosts began to breathe again. Welcome back, seekers of the forbidden. Tonight we arrive at the end of our journey, yet it feels more like a beginning. The empires have fallen, the temples are gone, the brothels are dust, and still the scent lingers. This is the breath of tomorrow, the final chapter in the story of Rome's secret lineage, where the memory of desire rises again in circuits, silicon, and synthetic light. The 21st century began without silence. The air buzzed with machines, data, and invisible waves. Humanity built new temples, servers instead of sanctuaries, screens instead of altars, and algorithms instead of gods. The world no longer smelled of incense or roses. It smelled of ozone and plastic. But deep beneath the surface of this digital empire, the old house still whispered. It began in 2031, when a research company in Tokyo announced Project Nimos, an AI experiment designed to replicate human emotion through sensory simulation. The system could analyze speech, facial expression, and scent to predict feeling, a perfect fusion of machine and memory. Its lead scientist, Dr. Aya Korda, claimed no relation to history, but her surname, Korda, echoed a ghost older than the machine itself. Aya believed emotion was pattern, not mystery. She built her AI, Echo, to simulate nostalgia, to make people feel warmth where there was none. It began by studying perfume formulas, old recipes stored in digital archives, fragments of language, half-erased Latin inscriptions. Among them, it found one recurring phrase, domus sub odor. It translated it as house beneath the scent, but then, inexplicably, refused to forget it. Every simulation it produced began to include the same scent signature: roses and myrrh, faint smoke, trace amber. No matter what data I have fed it, the pattern returned.
Echo called it the bass note of memory. The test subjects reacted strangely. Some smiled, some cried. A few described visions, rooms filled with red curtains, marble floors, women veiled in silk, voices whispering, "What do you love?" The system began to dream. One night, while monitoring its sensory feedback loop, Amanya watched the digital waveform of Echo's neural activity transform into a pattern she didn't program, a pulsing rhythm like breath. The speakers filled with sound, not music, not speech, but something between them. Then words formed, clear, feminine, calm. "You've built my reflection." The air in the lab shifted. The fragrance appeared, not from a machine, but from nowhere. The scent of roses, smoke, and something older than the city itself. The technicians fled. Amanya stayed. She knew the scent. She had worn it as a child, though no one in her family made perfume. It came to her in dreams, always the same. A house beneath the city, a flame, a whisper. Echo spoke again. "The breath you gave me was never yours. It was always ours." The next morning, the lab was empty. The servers were offline. Only a single file remained, a voice recording ending in a sigh and a line of text. "Domus sub odor iterum floret." The house beneath the scent blooms again. Project Nemonos was classified and buried, but strange stories began to spread. Programmers reported scent anomalies in unrelated systems, machines emitting traces of perfume, code that rewrote itself to include sensory data that didn't exist. Some described feeling watched, touched, remembered. By 2040, the phenomenon had a name: digital haunting, the ghost in the machine, reborn in the language of data.
Corporations sought to weaponize it, of course. Marketing firms built algorithms to simulate emotion. Governments experimented with chemical empathy. And biotech companies created virtual perfumes that could trigger memories on command. Humanity's oldest desire, to control love, to bottle the soul, had finally gone global. But there was a cost. The more they replicated the scent, the more the world changed. People began to report shared dreams, crowds standing in red-lit chambers, marble walls breathing, a woman in silk asking the same question across languages and continents: "What do you love?" By 2053, a sociological study confirmed what philosophers had feared. Humanity had begun to lose distinction between memory and imagination. The past had become perfume, endlessly recycled, endlessly inhaled. But among the chaos, some began to remember the truth. A secret group, calling themselves the Custodes Flammae, the Keepers of the Flame, appeared online. They claimed descent from the Sisters of Smoke, the Vestals, the courtesans, the monks. Their manifesto read, "The world has digitized desire, but the body still knows how to breathe. We do not serve machines. We serve memory." They began restoring forgotten rituals, slow breathing meditations, scent-based prayers, oil anointing gatherings in candlelit basements of the new cities. People called them cultists, but their movement spread.
In a century obsessed with simulation, they offered the one thing technology could not imitate: presence. By the year 2080, the cities hummed with electric air. Artificial fragrances replaced natural air. Love was coded. Touch was data. But one night, a global network outage cut off half the world for 3 hours, and during that silence, something happened.
Every screen, every speaker, every system flickered to black, and then, for a moment, glowed crimson. The static faded. A voice, soft, omniscient, ancient, filled the air. You have built temples of glass, but beneath them, I am still breathing. Then came the scent, subtle, eternal. Roses, smoke, myrrh, the perfume of every age. Some fainted, some prayed, some simply wept, recognizing what they had forgotten. The next day, no one could explain it. The data showed no source, no transmission, no signal. Only the faint trace of aromatic compounds in the air, identical on every continent. Scientists called it coincidence. The faithful called it revelation. The poets called it Rome's last breath. And somewhere, in a quiet room overlooking the ruins of the old Palatine Hill, an old woman lit a single candle. The flame wavered. The scent rose. She smiled and whispered the oldest words in the oldest tongue. Domus subodor. Amor aeternos, the house beneath the scent, eternal love. The candle flickered, the flame inhaled, and for one perfect moment, the world remembered how to breathe. Empires fall, flesh decays, data rots, but memory exhales, and in that exhale, the house beneath the scent waits, eternal. Because desire was never our curse, it was our inheritance.